Okay, welcome everyone. I'm really looking forward to this panel. I feel like it's the highlight of the day for me, and it really gets to the passion of what I'm interested in this work. So I'd like to welcome all the participants for joining us, and I'd like to welcome our amazing panelists that I had the honor of meeting two last week that I hadn't met yet before, and I'm proud to also call James a friend and co-board member of Bike Miami Valley. So I'm going to start briefly by introducing them, and then we're going to quickly kick it off to them because they have a lot to share with us this afternoon. And we'd also like to give you a chance to ask some questions. So, and with that being said, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box so the panelists know who you are and who they're talking to and where you work. We'll save the Q&A for the Q&A later, but please use the chat box to tell them they're doing great work or, that kind of feedback, but also let them know who's there. So Deltrece Daniels is one of Northeast Ohio's cycling educators, an entertainer, and bicycle model. She's a veteran of many bike tours and experiences, workshops, and presentations, where she is encouraging others to experience the joys on two wheels. Deltrece's own experience of cycling for transportation fuels an unrelenting passion for empowering others to explore their neighborhood and ride their bikes for transportation, exercise, and recreation. These days, you may see her biking to experience any new vegan restaurant, to catch a good shopping deal, or to simply watch the sunset. So a girl after my own heart, it sounds like. James Salim Muhammad is an internationally recognized comedian, public speaker, and native of Dayton. His community involvement is centered on sustainable civic progress and innovations of the new sharing economy. He believes that LINK, Dayton Bike Share Program, represents a model opportunity in both areas. And he is one of our most enthusiastic users of the LINK program. A terrible fisherman, novice bird watcher, and collector of hats, he's an avid enthusiast for all continued growth of the recreational assets of the Miami Valley. Tobi Otulana recently joined Toole Design as a planner. She worked previously as an associate planner at the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, where she coordinated the agency's technical assistance program, which provides Central Ohio communities with planning assistance for sustainable transportation and community development efforts, as well as funding for brownfields assessments and activities. Tobi is an advocate for equitable, safe, healthy, and enjoyable transportation. She currently serves as a board member for Central Ohio's bicycle advocacy nonprofit, Yay Bikes, and is a member of their advocacy committee. She's also a member of the American Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle-Friendly Professionals Diversity Task Force and serves as one of the APBP representatives on the National Complete Streets Coalition Steering Committee. Tobi is a founding organizer of the nonprofit Strong Women, Strong Places, which aims to empower and educate placemakers to create safe and equitable communities for women and non-binary individuals. Welcome, panelists, and thank you for being here. You can see why we're so excited to turn it over to them. So first, I just want to remind you, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, and let's save the Q&A for some great questions and dialogue at the end. So let's kick it off really quickly. It was a very formal introduction, and you all are amazing, but why don't you tell us a little bit about, the work that you're doing right now, and really what brought you into this work, right? How did you get here? And would you like to go first, Tobi?
Sure. Hopefully everyone can hear me all right. Thank you so much, Leslie, and thank you, participants, for joining this session. Just jumping right in, I thought a lot about how to do this introduction, and I think the way that I got into this work has a lot to do with where I come from. I'm the youngest person in my family. I was the only person in my family that wasn't born in Nigeria. My parents immigrated to England before I was born, then immigrated to the United States before that, and I was born here. And my parents assimilated in the way that America told them that they need to assimilate to be good immigrants. When I was, by the time I was 5 years old, I was living in a neighborhood. When I opened the door, I saw that I was worth investing, and that's what the outside realm told me with my eyes when I looked outside. But as I navigated that space, that messaging changed. I didn't see people who looked like me in that space. I didn't see people who had names like me in that space. I didn't see people who sounded like my parents in that space. And I started to internalize and understand the inequities in our built environment, the difference of when we would go spend time with our family and in the neighborhoods where I could get my hair done, the difference of the built environment in those spaces compared to the built environment of the neighborhood that I was living in, where there were sidewalks, there was a train station really close by, I could walk to the grocery store, I could walk to the movie theater. And I internalized that. Going into school, I thought I wanted to work in the anti-poverty space, potentially anti-homelessness space. And I studied sociology and geography. And it wasn't until I Google searched, what can I do with a sociology degree, that I figured out what urban planning was. It wasn't something that I knew I was exposed to when I was younger. And that is what led me to understanding what urban planning was. And I came to Columbus to do my master's degree in city and regional planning. And right around that time, I started an internship at a transportation agency. And that's where the connection started of understanding how important transportation equity is for overall equity and for showing children, specifically, Black children, marginalized children, disabled children, that when they open the door, the environment that they see tells them that they're worth investing in. And I was lucky enough to meet some great people who brought me into advocacy spaces, specifically bicycle advocacy. It wasn't something I would have thought, 10 years before that this is going to be the way that you're going to try and change the world and try and do things for people. But I understand now how important bicycling is in the conversation of transportation equity and addressing systemic racism, addressing systemic ableism within our community. Leslie mentioned that I just started at Toole. It's actually my 4th day today, so I can't share too much like what I'm actually working on. I'm excited to get started on a lot of projects. But I will say that Toole Design is a great organization that is led by values, and that's really what drew me to the agency. They're pioneering some different thought when it comes to transportation planning, thinking about ethics, beyond don't defraud your clients, but is it ethical to provide roadways that do not have sidewalks? Thinking about empathy and planning and designing roadways with empathy for users, and of course, equity. And so I'm excited to start working on projects that center those values.
Thank you, Tobi. That's great. And James, I see you. Why don't you go next, James?
Thank you, Leslie. So just as an introduction, my name is James Salim. But James Salim Ibn Muhammad, that's my full name. As Leslie has mentioned, I am a member of the board of Bike Miami Valley. So we are pleased to be able to talk to you guys today. What brought me to this, I'll get to that later, but what I want to explain, the kind of work that I do currently is I work primarily here at the Collaboratory, which, a shameless plug, please check us out on Instagram at Dayton Collab, shameless plug. But we do community work. We try to change the frameworks of how people interact within the community. We look at ourselves as a think tank, an idea lab that is open to people and the public in a way that it is not necessarily expressed in other places. So we pride ourselves on having these intellectual honesty conversations and gatherings. And central to that is not only gathering here in our physical space, but doing the gatherings out in the community where folks are doing things. My primary interest in biking came about from community work and having to be in places. I mean, I've had a bike since I was a child and enjoyed it, but primarily now it is to me the single most equitable community mechanical advantage that a person can have. So I'm really a fan of the concept of a community sharing not only a resource, but in this case, sharing a tool. And if we can expand and share that and express that as a relationship in terms of how everyone can access it, then the actual delivery of the use of that tool, in this case, the bike share, drives diversity and equity. It drives inclusion simply by doing it that way. So that's what excites me. And I'll turn it over to the next.
Thanks, James. Deltrece, would you like to wrap that question up?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out this afternoon to this wonderful summit. I hope you're having a good time. My name is Deltrece, and how I got into this is literally, I would say, being a bicycle model, role model. As Leslie mentioned in my bio, that I do talk about being a bicycle model. And what I mean by that is, if you were to visit the city of Cleveland and you were to use the airplane and then take public transportation from the airport to downtown Cleveland, you would see my picture and my bicycle at Tower City, which is like our major metropolitan places for trains and bikes and stuff like that. And so, like, literally being a bike model, being actually out there on the roads riding your bikes. We can sit in these sessions all day long and talk about bikes, but until you're actually out there riding, for real riding, that's how you're going to have those conversations get started, and how you can get into other conversations about how the roads can be different, or what does it mean on the roads for different types of people. So by me just being out there riding and having a good time and seeing that, I'm having a good time, but then I'm also scared because cars are scary. So that is, in a nutshell, how I really got into this. And I am currently the outreach and membership manager at Bike Cleveland, and just encouraging other people that look like me to get out there and get on bikes and support our work and our mission, and just to be comfortable and confident on the bicycles. Because we all know, if you're not comfortable and confident on the bikes, you're not going out there and you're not riding and not participating in anything. So that is where I come in and say, come on, let's have fun on bikes, being safe at the same time.
Great. Thanks, Deltrece. I appreciate those introductions and those stories. We're going to kick it off with some questions that we've prepared for you, a couple of us, and then we're going to turn it over to the participants. And the first couple of questions target each of you. And I just kind of want to remind everyone that, we're in the diversity and inclusion for advocacy and planning panel track, right? And I'd like to add equity to that: diversity, equity, and inclusion, and advocacy and planning. So we're going to hope to get into the nitty gritty of that. And I want us to be really honest and open in this conversation so we can get as much work done and hopefully leave here with some action that we can all take, right? That's the goal, is action. So let's start with Tobi. What attracted you really to Yay Bikes as a board member, and you're taking the time to be a board member there? And what are you most proud of about Yay Bikes and the impact that organization makes as a board member?
Yeah. So what attracted me to Yay Bikes is that the organization is an advocacy nonprofit, really focuses on advocacy and education. And, it's a lot of what Deltrece just described to us of what she does, advocating to people and meeting them where they are and educating them how to feel safe and comfortable riding on the roadways, as one arm. And, like COVID has affected so many organizations, we've had to cut back on rides and things like that. But that is something that Yay Bikes is so well known for in the community in Central Ohio. And the other arm of that is advocating in spaces, planning spaces, engineering spaces, participating in steering committees and things like that, and bringing that perspective of the people that we ride with, of the people that we're educating with, into those planning and transportation decision-making spaces, and standing along those values of that people should have the right to ride safely. They should have the right to have ownership over their roadways and what they want their bicycle facilities to look like, and standing firm by that, whether people agree, whatever sector it is, public, private sector, standing firm to those values. And so that was really what attracted me to the organization. And especially through COVID, being able to focus then a little bit more so on the advocacy side of things. I think it's been a good opportunity. We're hoping that we can start to add rides back, in the coming months or next year, and get back to that education and focus that the organization has.
Yeah, that's great, Tobi. Deltrece, that leads into the question I was going to you that we were going to ask you. Can you speak a little bit about the work that Bike Cleveland's done to diversify its membership? You mentioned that already in your comments at the beginning, and even within its leadership.
Yes, absolutely. To directly talk about the leadership aspect of the question, and I'm going to use a story from my experience. There was a situation one time where it was an unfortunate crash in a local community. And when I went there to support the situation, that's where I learned about the LCI, League Cycling Instructor certification. And from there, I was thinking, okay, well, this is how I can learn more about bikes and understand why do cyclists do the things that they do, because I didn't know. And so our organization, at that time, I was not a member of the organization, just a regular bike rider on the streets. But the Bike Cleveland is supportive of people and all types of people to support them in their advocacy efforts. So, and I'm bringing that up as sometimes there's monies that you just don't have enough, but having an organization to provide scholarship opportunities so that people can participate and still have a voice being heard, and not having a voice because they don't have money. And so that's why I'm bringing that up, because our organization is always trying and always doing above and beyond to making sure that minority groups can have access to opportunities to be able to go forward and be bike role models. And so we're doing it again. I want to shameless plug really quick. If anyone's interested in becoming an LCI League Cycling Instructor, again, the Bike League is adamant on making sure that people of color can have these same opportunities. And so that's where our organization, Bike Cleveland, does as well, making sure that people have access.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Deltrece. And we're going to talk a little bit about what access means, really later on if we have time. James, I think the work I'm familiar with that you do in the community kind of is what we're talking about, right? Working deeply with the community and have the community leading the conversation, right? Versus inviting them to the conversation after it's already started, right? So can you explain a little bit maybe about a couple strategies that you've been involved in or that you've seen or that you've used where you've really met people where they're at?
Yeah, and what that dynamic that you're talking about, traditional sort of engagement is about an invitation to people to participate at a place that they're not necessarily believing that they have a history of dealing with it. You see, so not only inviting folks to the executive table, but it's also inviting folks from that other table to the communities that they're in, so that there's a way to have this trust in not only the process, but more importantly, the people who are doing it. It seems to echo that folks will afterwards, most of the things that happen in their communities, franchise communities to be specific, happen as things that are done to them and not really things that are done with. We go from that standpoint to now where we want to have folks participating and using and directing in the future. All that here is based on gatherings. We have small gatherings, communities where we try to introduce in a very specific way people that you would consider to be influences. So I'll give you an example of some of the work. And this is a work with a partner that we've done in Indianapolis. They will have these gatherings throughout their neighborhood and their community. And they've invited through this work, and it's been featured on NPR, I will say this, they've invited folks because then this neighborhood in upper Northwest, Unwa, Northwest in Indianapolis, who love riding bikes, were the neighborhood organized them to such an extent, opened up a little bike garage. The garage was just servicing by, doing little tune-ups for the folks in the neighborhood getting. So they were introduced to folks with influence in that community, i.e. their community foundation and their community's police chief, to support them to open up an actual job that is there. The workers that work there are the kids in the neighborhood. It's supported through the folks in the neighborhood in a way that it's not about necessarily any one person's institution. It's simply about a framework for trust where the people who make decisions can be involved with the people that they're directly affecting. So to speak specifically, that's the kind of framework and the mindset we try to keep when we do our work. And then specifically to the bike, and what I love about that, again, is I will say is because to me, when I view bicycling, it is such a one-on words. It is very simply a mechanical device that that at some everyone can use. And the equitable part, folks were in that early track, but I think the equitable part is making sure that their skill level have access to that kind of equipment that is appropriate to them to bike. I think that these responsibility is then to express how that access, very specific geography of users, in one particular group of users. Like from an overall standpoint, I like to see it as we increase the total number of accidents on average for every user by a half a mile. Now, we're going to do it better in year 2 or year 3 of whatever our directive is, and trying to intentionally think about how we influence that that decision by being people necessarily at the table actively to participate at the table. So I see that we have folks here who are planners who are different, coming to me. My goal would be to introduce them around town in a comment. That's one of the other things I didn't mention. These are things that we try to do these meetings in places that are commonly accessible to everyone, so it doesn't feel like people are being called into something or called out. We try to have these as much as open forums and open communications, but in a very structured, questioning way, where it's not focused on necessarily deficits in the community, but focused on how we can utilize people's gifts, their talents, their energy, and get excited about what. So I'll leave it.
So thanks, James. I appreciate it. So I want to jump really quickly then into this next question on all of you guys, for all of you guys to kind of talk through here with us. So, there's been a lot of recent, or not so recent, but finally some recognition and acknowledgement maybe in some of the systemic ways planning in the planning profession has perpetuated racism, right? And perpetuated communities to stay potentially in disenfranchised situations where they don't have opportunity. So as that awareness has becoming more broad for others, because I think some people like you all, Tobi, I'm sure have been aware of that for a long, long time, as you are a planner. But as it's becoming a little bit more widely acknowledged, how do you think we can overcome that conversation quickly, right? How can we not get caught up in that issue alone, but quickly just get over that, right? And let's start really not just talking about that, how that's going on. Oh, wow, there's been redlining, right? Oh, wow, there's been this, because we've been hearing that for a long time. But how can we actually find that action? And I don't want to call it low-hanging fruit because I don't want to minimize the work, right? It's all important. But how can we jump quickly to that next step, right? Beyond acknowledging or recognizing that's systemically been an issue within planning. Who would want to try to bite that off first? Who wants to start?
I'll speak on it really quick, because something that's on my mind as you ask this question is that finding the leaders in the communities who are already biking, just like Tobi was mentioning about the bicycle shop, that people who are already doing the work, but they don't realize they're actually advocating for safe streets. They're just out there riding bikes because they enjoy it, and they're getting the youth involved riding bikes because they enjoy it too, and getting them off the roadways doing other things that is not good. But that's how I'm thinking that what has somewhat worked a little bit for us in our community, because I say a little bit because then you have to talk about the politics and the leaders, and you can only do so much. But that is what I've seen, that seeing people who are already doing the work in the community and uplifting them, giving them resources, giving them information, giving them education. Because again, we often see a lot of times people, they just don't know. And if you don't know, you don't know. And so giving them information and supporting them in their work. So getting those people in those communities, uplifting them is a right step in the direction of trying to change what it looks like in the communities, because people are going to listen. The leaders in those communities are going to listen to those residents first and foremost, then they're going to listen to me, who works at an organization.
I think from a planning perspective, there's a lot. I hope everyone had the opportunity to hear Charles T. Brown in his keynote session. And, you know, he said a lot, that phrasing of past and current. And I think, you know, really paying attention to that current piece. No one has redlining on the books, but we have policies that are still, you know, perpetuating systemic racism. And you know, there's lots of terms to throw around, unintended consequences, whatnot. Doesn't matter. There's still consequences. It's people's reality. And I think, like, I have nothing to say that he didn't say in the keynote session. It's evaluating current processes. It's taking a look at data and saying, what are the outcomes that we want and what are the outcomes that are actually happening? Evaluating our process, evaluating our outcomes. I think the planning profession is really good at, like, if they can, you know, if there's one thing that they like can acknowledging racism, and then like it's a pat on the back, like, good job, we did that. Like, I think we need to kind of get over that as a planning profession, and really, you know, acknowledge. And the next step is like do something about it. The next step is evaluate what's happening right now and see that, are we still getting the same outcomes of redlining with our current policies? I you know, rewatch the keynote session every day if you need to understand, like, you know, he laid it out so well, the steps that we can take as a planning profession, to not get stuck in the past and be proud of ourselves for acknowledging the past, but to actually move forward and understand that, you know, the systems that were in place in the past are still in place today in a different form. And I think we need to really be aware of that and be cognizant of that in every step of the planning process.
Yeah, I would add, just from on the community side, I think if there's no one single step, there are certain steps that are happening. Like, I will acknowledge, I am very happy when I see planners, young planners like Tobi, who look like people in the neighborhood. And when I see that in the process, I am more inclined to trust the process. That's part of human nature, which, you know, I have to subtract 4 times as well. To say that is looking forward, it is very much a part of our conversations to try to step from the past without necessarily forgetting it. And I think that's, you know, just the fact that when you have more people who can have these kind of conversations now, and inform those kind of decisions, I'm not sure that the system's in place, because, you know, people do things a lot of the time simply because that's the way they found it being done when they got there. And so I think that there does have to be sort of an always kind of a thought to, what is the system that could shake up the system? Where is the next new system at, and how do we find that tipping point? I'm not a planner, and I'm not institutional in that nature, so I hope that doesn't offend folks who are. But I just feel like, you know, societies move a lot faster than institutional planning or strategies, and a lot of the time that is things have to just catch up, and you have to force those systems to catch up at times, just from community action.
So we do have a lot of planners, you know, on the call here, on the Zoom, and in the participant list for the panel. So I guess remo, that's a verb now too, right? We're remoing, I guess. I don't know. But there are some planners out there. But there's also, I would like to say, just a lot of public servants, right? People that work for government, people that work for agencies, and in the end, public servants, right? Here to serve the common good. And I think if it's professionals' responsibility to do this, right, as public servants, how does that happen, and what are ways they can make the shift? How do we shift the paradigm, right? How do we not fix the system, right? Because the system was really never meant to work for everyone that we're using. And how do we go about creating new systems and building new frameworks for all of us as professionals, planners, or public servants to do better?
One thing that our organization does do is do professional bicycle rides. I'm always a big proponent of, like the walking in someone else's shoes, right? You don't know what it's like until you walk in someone's shoes. No one can really walk in someone's shoes, but everyone can get on a bike and it knows what it feels like and their experience, when they are on the bike. And so we do, it may sound like just a simple answer, go out and ride a bike, but it does lead to more. And I've seen it in some of the planners thinking, if they're not a bicycle rider, if they're really car centric, but then they have these positions where they're responsible for planning the roads. And then once we get them on the bike and then talk about and ride around to certain areas, problem areas, good areas, all the areas, then sometimes a light bulb goes off and it's like, oh, wow. And then that will get them back in their office and maybe make some changes. But that is something that we have done and we still will do in the future, is have professional council rides. Professional development rides, not just council rides, just really.
I think that's a great idea. So whether it's the community or elected officials, and I mean, I think Dayton's done that before. So thanks for bringing that up as really a place of equity, right? That we can all get on a bike and share something. No, that's a great point. Tobi, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think two key thoughts. One is something that James brought up, which is the trust aspect. And, I think from the public servant standpoint, trust takes time to build up. James mentioned, having a diverse planning field is one step in the right direction, and helping and truly inclusive, like people being empowered to speak up in public, as a public servant, as a planner, and feel that their ideas will be, taken and run with. That's one way. But the other aspect of it is that trust takes time. And I think that planning agencies and transportation agencies need to give their staff, it comes down to funding a lot of the time, but give staff the time to build trust. Don't just go to community meetings when you're on the agenda and you have something to present, and then you never see those people again until 6 months later when there's a project update. Go to those meetings, be quiet and listen, absorb, offer resources when you have them, offer to help how you can when you can, but listen and take that time. And it like I said, it comes down to funding and in prioritizing that. Community engagement isn't just a line on the project sheet, a task order that you get for community engagement. It is something that is required throughout, not a planning process, throughout being a public servant, throughout trying to engage people in all types of projects, short range, long range. And so I think, planners at all stages really need to be being in community meetings and showing their faces and showing that they are someone that the community can trust. Not just being there, but then listening and taking that feedback back and making changes to processes based off of what the community is telling you is important to them.
James, do you have anything to add to them? Tobi, I appreciate that. It really is about being present present in the community and building trust.
Yeah,
I agree.
I would that you hit the nail on the head in terms of acknowledging that that trust thing is not a day one thing. It's not a day 5,000. No one knows when that moment happens when you trust a process or people, but it does reflect on that. And it's not overcomplicated. At least this is my belief. Others may believe differently, but I don't believe that in terms of how we're using the trails and our resources, how we're asking people to invite them to. I don't sense, or at least in my experience, that is something that is to what generally people want. People want to be able to uh, enjoy and access their spaces and the places around where they live to as much as they want to engage them. And then the key point for a community is once we've got this access where we know it's open and people can use it, how are we then inviting them? How are we getting that information to them? And how is that effectively being done? And is it, I think that one of the things that when we talk about where we are now in terms of diversity and equity and trying to be inclusive in things is acknowledging that we have to have that conversation about what everyone wants in front of everyone. In other words, that's the thing. You get what I mean? Like I don't know if there was an active determination, and probably there was, how the trails themselves are developed. But what I will say is, if we are actively having that open conversation in a way now, then again, by default, we're going to deliver something that is, that leaves that sort of segregation and legacy of disenfranchisement where it should be in the past. That's not what we're talking about tomorrow or today. This is how we avoid that. And we avoid that by saying, developing things that are open and access to everyone. On day one, it's everyone can use this day one. And then the whole dynamic of that conversation changes. It may not change in other places, but we can definitely do this part. We're talking about in the right of way, the public spaces, and in things that are specific to geographies where people live. It's just common to what everybody wants. So it's just a mindset, I think. And I don't know if we talk about it enough when we actively invite people to be a part of it, to really talk about that future state. This is what we really want in the future, and keeping our eye on how we want to do that.
I think it is a mindset, James. I think that's really a great point. Thanks for wrapping that up. Someone has a really great question. We're going to kind of start moving around a little bit and pop into the Q&A as people hop in and want to hear from you all while they have some short time with you, because you do have so much to offer. And then we can always hop back to the other questions we have. But someone is saying, to the point made by Charles and echoed by Tobi, do any of you have examples of community members being added to the engagement process as paid ambassadors, right? Paid for their time, both during and after the planning process. And then I would add another level to that question and say, and then becoming leaders, right? And then becoming in leadership roles too after that.
Well, to say yes. Now we don't use the term ambassadors per se, but we have absolutely engaged community members and paid them for their in our work, because a part of that is respecting the time that they're giving and acknowledging the value. If you want people to value the things that you want them to talk about, you have to value their time in it. So over the last 2 years, we've been engaged in Westwood here in our area at the behest of one of the community centers there, working with them. Specifically, part of that was to engage the residents and engage them by employing residents to do the engagement, by paying the residents to do the engagement. So my answer is yes. I'll let the other speakers.
An example that comes to mind is a Smart Columbus program that's in Columbus, and that's an organization that's not above critique in certain areas. But one thing that they have done really well is use ambassadors in the community, specifically in the Linden community in Columbus, which was mentioned in the application, where they got the funding for the Smart Columbus program, and I met quite a few of those ambassadors in different spaces, and they do a really great job of speaking up for how to reach people in their community. I can think of examples of meetings where, planning agencies or public agencies, or even myself, is coming in like, okay, what can we do to engage people in Smart Columbus? And cell phones and laptops and Wi-Fi, all these things are involved, and our community ambassadors are like, no. we need to reach people who don't have Wi-Fi and who aren't using their cell phone and don't know what a QR code is. And so I think that's a good example of a program that uses community ambassadors, uses paid ambassadors, just like James said, acknowledging the time that people are putting in and respecting that to reach community members who may otherwise not be engaged.
Great point, Tobi. Deltrece, do you have some ideas or thoughts?
I just wanted to piggyback that our organization, which is reminding me of a bike ambassadorship program that we have formed with a community and one of the CDCs locally here in Cleveland. And what is great, however, I'm thinking about why it's not today the bike ambassador is not doing what he has a passion for. Is it goes back to having leadership skills. And so there's people who are just, I don't want to say just, but they're a bike rider. They love to ride bikes. They want to ride bikes. And oftentimes we see that like, oh, okay, cool. You ride bikes. Let's help. Let's use, I don't want to say use you, but in a sense, let's get you to get some other people to help ride bikes too. But if they're not comfortable in that, because there's a little form of leadership that needs to occur to encourage other people. We can support them and do as much as we can, but until those person on the inside can recognize those leadership qualities and can bring other people on board, it's a challenge. So we need to think about our bike ambassadorship program again. They did receive a stipend as well too. So we understand that time is valuable, and yes, everyone needs to be compensated for their time and their expertise. But also, I just want to go back and think about the type of person that we need to strengthen in addition to the education, but on the inside, they're helping to have other people come along with them without getting burnt out.
Yeah, I mean, the really great points are coming up. I think the burnout, thanks for bringing that up, Deltrece, because I was actually going to think about how that is for people like all three of you who are carrying the weight of a lot of work ahead of you, right? Not just as a planner, Tobi, or not just as an advocate, Deltrece, or a community organizer, James, but as one who's trying to really change the story and the narrative and bring more people that look like the community into the roles that you're in. That takes a lot of work, right? Extra work. So I just want to point that out and say it's really appreciated and seen right now. So first of all, that, and then second of all, the stuff you were saying, Tobi, I just want to point out that barriers sometimes aren't what people think they are, right? Like accessibility could mean all kinds of things. And sometimes we don't even know what the barriers are, right? And language is something that came to mind very quickly, Tobi, when you were talking, and the fact that like, or financial things, right? The QR code, right? There's so many barriers that we don't even realize we're building with technology, right? And I think if we could really rely more on the technology of our hearts, right? Then we would get down to like what's really going to work for everyone. There's two questions that relate in the chat box that I want to move on to that connect, and it gets down to maintenance, right? And infrastructure. So great trails are great, right? But great trails that aren't maintained aren't so great. And even though we have 300 miles of connected paved bike trails in the Bike Miami Valley area, the greater region here, and I know Cleveland and Columbus has a lot of trails too, it's not always equitable in how they're maintained and invested in, right? And in our community, the west and east side of Dayton and the north and south have a lot of disparities in how we invest in our infrastructure. And so people are asking, you know, how can you put pressure on the city? Sometimes maybe it's other agencies, but for this question, they're asking for the city of Dayton because someone's saying there's a big difference when the park agency owns the trail versus the city. So anyway, how do you put pressure on anyone, the city or agencies, to invest and provide more equity in the trail system as a region? Safety, lighting, all of it, right?
Okay, so I'll tackle that. So here's just a real quick checklist on that. And I see, thank you very much. I think Mary Ellen, if my computer is so small on that. So I see that chat about where the trails at 5 River Metro Parks, and they do absolutely do a great job of the trails that are in their stewardship. I'd love to know specifically in the city where those issues you're facing are, and feel free to send that via either our Remo, or you can send it to my email at james@daytoncollaboratory.org, and I'll send it and talk to Laura. Because that's one of the things that Bike Miami Valley as an organization is committed to. And so the way to get that pressure point is to actually find out, well, what's going on, who's in charge, what is those specific issues. And a lot of the times, especially here, the communications of what is happening and how the trails are being developed is sometimes an issue. And I know, speaking on behalf of some of the folks who have been coordinating planning projects in our area, there's been a perception at times that they're fixing one part or the other, but they've actually been on top of things because they've been waiting for some other things like the pipeline work that's going on in a large area of our city to be done before infrastructure things that are, I would call them more beautification, are put in. It doesn't make sense to do it twice. And a lot of that becomes a function of not enough, in my opinion, again, not enough community people on both sides knowing that there's a calendar of things going on, being aware that there are multiple layers of things that are happening, and then that information not being communicated effectively. One of our goals is to develop that kind of community knowledge guide, or, so that folks can be aware going forward, what's upcoming, what's going on. I know that a lot of the planning and overlapping will have community forums or meetings where it's open to the public, and for whatever reason, sometimes that's not communicated enough to the public to make sure that community is there, or at least being able to firsthand to express to other community members that they were there, and this is where they, what was think needs support and what needs to be looked at. So again, specific to that one, I'd love to know where it is, because I'm not saying we can cure it, but the first step is making sure we know where it is so we can address it.
Yeah, just to build on that, James, I think what you're saying, a lot of it is data, and cities and professionals like well-maintained data and understand are those projects that are coming up the pike, and where they are and what the timing is, and the opportunity to make additional improvements based off of them, or data about when facilities were last maintained and by who. Qualitative data like 311 calls, which, taking them with a grain of salt, knowing that's not necessarily an equitable representation of where problems are, who has the time to depending what communities have the time to call into 311 and make those reports and whatnot. But, taking into account the qualitative and quantitative data, and setting a high standard, not just around projects, but around maintenance as well. And I know that's not, it's easy to say that. There's a lot of moving pieces, especially when you're talking about coordinating between transportation departments and parks departments and things like that. But I think, prioritize it where you can, because again, it shows people whether or not they're worth investing in. It makes me think of a story. I went to a public park, and they did like there's a pop-up that the age-friendly group had done, and they were working with Build a Better Block, and a pastor from a church across the street from the park was there, and there was someone from the parks department, and there are trees all next to the basketball courts, and the pastor said, no one's, look at that tree, no one's trimmed this tree in 20 years. And the parks department person was like, oh yeah, like I'll get someone out there, like, sorry, kind of thing. And the pastor was like, that's a decision. It was a decision not to trim that tree for 20 years. And maybe to the parks person and as a planner, you're like, no, things happen and there's lots of other priorities. But what it tells everyone in that neighborhood is that it's a decision. For 20 years, you can't play basketball. Like, what does that say to those kids? So where you can prioritize that.
These are all great examples of trail maintenance in the different communities. We have the Cleveland Metro Parks and the Cuyahoga Valley National Park up here in the greater Northeast Ohio. And I have not personally heard of any issues with the trail maintenance, but that doesn't mean it's not there. I do want to mention that outside of trail maintenance and the public roadways, we do have similar to 311, a reported tool. However, it's electronic. You must use your smartphone, and that's not helpful if not everyone has a smartphone. So just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, that definitely brings that up again, Deltrece, I think. Thank you. We have 5 more minutes together, and I want to give you each a chance to kind of wrap things up and have any closing comments on all of it, big picture. And so I think, I guess one thing I would like to mention is that, what I see a lot when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, in the work I've been involved in the past 5 years, is I see people try to put it in a bucket. I see people try to make it like a pillar in their plan, right? And I'm not a fan at all of that model. And I want to see what your comment, right? I feel diversity, equity, inclusion should be embedded within the entire organization and agency, not one step in their strategic plan, right? Or one bucket where they feel like they can create a checklist. And so any thoughts on that and how people can really take this back to their professions and even their personal lives? Because I kind of think it starts with yourself, right? And the work that you do as an individual, and the training you can get as an individual in the work, right? And understanding your own implicit bias, your own privilege, and the story that you're contributing to the narrative, right? So you can also do better and do good in the work. So how can we all do better as leaders? How can we invest and act to really make diversity, equity, inclusion a holistic part of our work and our lives and our community?
It's a great question. I would end it by saying, not to be cliche, but to go out there and actually ride in those communities, because that's what I've done, and to help other people to step up and also become leaders in their communities by me being out there and seeing, so they can see me. It just starts like it's people get comfortable, and then help them with their passion and help them be responsible. So just getting out there. So getting out there in the communities that you just don't normally see people on bikes, but get out there on bikes.
I would say, I totally agree, Deltrece. And I would say, again, from the planning profession perspective, be very intentional that, diversity, equity, inclusion, these are 3 different words with 3 different meanings. And we can't lump them together into one bucket, and being very intentional about the processes, diversity in process, inclusive processes, equitable processes, and the same thing in outcome. And it comes down to, sometimes it comes down to innovative things, but sometimes it comes down to things that we know work, like funding priorities. And so just being very, very intentional that DEI is an acronym for 3 things that are, very important each, and they work together, but they're not all the same thing.
I would echo what has been said. What I would add to that is, I think that the words, just like a lot of times, if you really don't believe in those words, then you're just servicing them. So I think you have to articulate things in a way talking about sort of raise it to a higher level of how you feel about yourself, but how you feel about humanity and what you feel is really just and is fair and I hate to use the word equitable, but expressing it that way. And if what I would challenge folks, whether they be public services, community members, planners, whatever their role is, but to examine themselves first and say, these decisions, the things that I want to do today is what I'm inviting the people of tomorrow to participate in. I'm inviting the folks coming tomorrow to be a part of something that's better than I participated in. And that, to me, is a core kind of the mindset shift that we talked about. That will, and of course, everybody's not ready for that at the same time. But if enough people are actively doing that, then that actual activity generates other people will see and want to express and participate in. And so when you inform your work that way, whatever that work is, whatever your role is, with that possible hope, you know, in a just a very practical sort of way, I personally have seen it work in lives, in communities, and change. And I believe that it's the real way that things really get better anyway. So I'm trying to skip those steps and go to that, inviting people to what I hope for tomorrow is a better thing.
Thanks, James. I appreciate that. Thanks, Deltrece. Thanks, Tobi. Your time. Thank you so much. Thank you for the tremendous work that you do. And like I said, for the weight that you carry for a lot of representation that you have to do probably every time you walk in the room, right? So I think it's really valued, and your excitement, Deltrece, around cycling is contagious. Tobi, I think you're an inspiring planning professional, and I hope a lot of young people get to be around you so you can inspire the next generation of planners. James, you're a community builder that Dayton's really lucky to have. I'll say that. So let's leave with this quote as we go back to the main room and find out where the next cycling summit is. So let's try to work together to build and create this quote here by Rudolf Steiner. A healthy society is found only when in the mirror, each soul of the whole community finds its reflection. And when in the whole community, the virtue of each one is living. So thank you all. And I hope you have a great weekend. Tobi, Deltrece, James, thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Good seeing everyone.
Good to see you all.